Right. Welcome everyone to SETA Washington DC's online panel. Today's discussion will focus, of course, on one of the most consequential developments in the Middle East, at least in the last couple of decades, the US-Israeli attacks on Iran. I will not introduce the issue, as I'm sure participants to this event are most likely following the developments very closely, which are like very prominent on social media, on traditional media, everywhere. So we're fortunate enough today to be joined by a very distinguished group of experts today. They bring a deep experience in the region's politics and security issues, and hopefully they'll help us unpack the consequences of the recent attacks on Iran, as well as the US's and maybe Israel's calculus behind it, as to the reasons of the attack, the timing, and more details. Before I turn to the panel, I'd like to remind that you can ask your questions using Zoom's chat functionality. I'm going to collect them and direct them to the relevant speaker towards the end of the event. Before we start, let me introduce the panel. Trita Parsi, he is the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He is also the co-founder and former president of the National Iranian American Council. Alex Vatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. He specializes in the Middle Eastern regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. He's the right guy to talk at the moment. And Kadir Üstün is the executive director of SETA Washington, D.C. So, Trita, let's start with you. You have been following the issue, the US-Iranian diplomatic process for so long. You have been contributing to the policy debate on the issue as well. In this particular instance, let's start with why do you think diplomacy has failed in this case?
I think diplomacy failed in this case, and I'm happy you asked that question. I think there is a narrative being formed out there that says that diplomacy was just a complete ruse. The Iranians certainly are under the belief that this was just a deception, it was never real. I'm not so sure that that is the case. I think that diplomacy actually was real, but it wasn't regular diplomacy. It was that Trump was under this crucial impression that Iran is much weaker than it is, and as a result, the only acceptable outcome was that Iran would completely surrender. And the diplomacy was simply designed for Kushner and Witkoff to check in every 2 weeks or so and see, okay, are you ready to surrender now? No? Okay, we'll just send a couple of more aircraft carriers and perhaps you will be ready then. Assuming that the Iranians ultimately feared war more than they feared surrender. And I think reality was the opposite. That same assumption that the Iranians are so much weaker is part of the reason why Trump thought that this war would be over by Monday morning. That by the time that the markets had opened, it would be fine, the Iranian regime would have imploded or surrendered. And he had told regional leaders that this will take no more than 4 days. And now we are here, 6 days or so. The timeline has been changed from 4 days to 4 weeks, and now the Pentagon is saying 5 months. I think it's a clear sign that those erroneous assumptions not only led to the collapse of the diplomacy, but also led to the war turning increasingly into a quagmire.
Oh, also, let me add this. There we see arguments like Iranians could have given Trump a win earlier on and stopped the war from happening. Would you agree to those arguments?
I don't, except for one thing. I don't think more concessions on the nuclear front that wouldn't amount to the type of surrender that Trump wanted, which was just give up everything, including on other issues that are not nuclear related. I don't think any of those type of concessions would have hurt. I still do believe, however, that the Iranians could have done something else much earlier on that could have changed the trajectory of this. And that is if they had agreed to talk directly to Trump. They refused to do so. I think that was a huge mistake. And I think the more the Iranians did not talk to Trump directly, and I'm not talking about to Witkoff or anyone else, to Trump, the more it reinforced Trump's view that the Iranians were not serious, but also that they were weak. It reinforced that assumption. Because in Trump's mindset, as you all remember, when he came in, he said, I'll talk to anyone. I'll talk to Kim Jong-un. I'll talk to whoever, because I am strong. And all of these previous presidents, they wouldn't talk to these enemies because they're weak, but I'm strong. Well, if you define yourself as strong because you're willing to talk, you will define the Iranians as weak because they refuse to talk to you directly. So I think that was a mistake that not only reinforced that impression, but also made sure that Trump's only input for the last couple of months,
Mhm.
at least on the American side, not from the regional side, has been from the proponents of war. And I think the manner in which the Israelis in particular have been extremely active have very much shaped the view in Trump's mind, particularly on the weakness of Iran, which essentially meant this is going to be easy. You should not make a deal. You can become the president that puts an end to the Islamic Republic or gets it to finally submit to the United States. Why would you give up on that by striking some sort of a compromise?
Okay, thanks, Trita. Alex, I want to ask you about the process of transition. You have written about this recently. Um, with the start of the war, we have seen many high figures from the top echelons of the regime have been removed, chiefest of them being the Khamenei himself. Um, what can we say about the transition? What happens after the supreme leader?
So, Ozan, it's really important for us to remember in the history of the Islamic Republic, 47 years, they've had one succession process in the summer of 1989. And that succession process happened relatively in an obscure manner. To this day, we don't exactly know what happened. What we do know is that a couple of basic realities were very different than what we are at today. One, the country was not at war.
Mhm.
There's no external threat. And at home, the protesters that you've seen in Iran in recent months, I mean, there was anger in Iranian society even in 1989, but they were certainly not mobilized. In other words, the space for the Islamic Republic to go through the constitutional process, to have somebody to take over, the space was there. It was still a surprise candidate that came out of that process. Ali Khamenei was not on anyone's shortlist if you had asked Assembly of Experts, but that was what the political expediency at the time, led by the then Ayatollah Rafsanjani and Khomeini's son, uh, they basically, got ahead and imposed Khamenei as the supreme leader. They had their own agenda, and Khamenei later on sort of essentially outsmarted them. But that's a separate issue. If you want, we can talk about it. But my point is, 1989 is the only other time this system has chosen a supreme leader. It was expediency that mattered the most. And I think that's the one thing I will take away from the lesson of 1989. So I am looking for what is expedient for whatever is left of the Islamic Republic going forward. You know, it's not someone with religious credentials you need to be looking for. It's someone who will be politically in a position to be acceptable to maximum number of interest group, again, of what's left of the Islamic Republic. Chief among them, obviously, the Revolutionary Guards, the intelligence services, perhaps to some extent, maybe what's left of the Khamenei network, if you want to separate the Khamenei network from the IRGC, which is not an easy thing to do, but Khamenei had his own bait or household, his Khamenei network. So I don't know how many of these individuals and interest groups as this war continues will be relevant. So many have already been killed. More are likely to be killed. So, it could well be the case, going back to my point about expediency, that if this regime survives, if these airstrikes don't bring it down, if the protesters don't come back and the Iranian people don't take their country back the way President Trump is calling for, then what's left of the regime, they could, for the sake of continuity, have another singular supreme leader. I can understand the attraction there because they do want to signify continuity for the base of the regime, because the base right now is confused. They have had the same leader for so long, 36 years, and that leader is suddenly gone. So Khamenei had left some big shoes to fill. But I think, going back to my point of expediency, the regime then, based on who's left, needs to make a decision, a fundamental decision. Double down, speak of revenge, speak of staying in this war for as long as it takes, or quickly look for off ramp, look for a face saving option. We're not there yet, but that could come. I noticed Ali Larijani is already talking about having killed 500 Americans without any evidence, but the 500 number is one that's been floating around for some time, which could be justified saying we got our revenge back and therefore we could be excused if we're looking for a way out. So the regime can decide doubling down on the legacy of Khamenei and the policies that he pursued, which I think most of us who want to be fair about this, were disastrous policies that brought Iran to this point. I mean, Khamenei really is the one architect. I mean, we can blame the United States, others later, but in terms of how Iran moved forward on his watch to this point of disaster, I don't think anybody's going to question that Khamenei was the main architect. So they can double down on his legacy, or they can say it's time to accept that we're alone, that our own people have had enough with us, and that this foreign threat, the Americans, the Israelis, not going to go anywhere. Maybe look for not just a way out, but look to reinvent ourselves as the Islamic Republic post Ali Khamenei. Because look, Donald Trump has already achieved, in a way, a victory from his point of view. The regime has changed. Khamenei's gone. But if you have a Mujtaba Khamenei, his son, taking over, that's doubling down on the old father's legacy. That's more bad news coming their way. There could be other people we can point to who might take over. They might have the opportunity. It's a might. I'm not saying this can happen certainty, because remember, you have a country of 90 million people, vast majority, probably upward 90%, who really have had enough. Who've really had enough. One thing is to oppose the regime because they were forcing the hijab, the veil, on you. Another thing is the regime bringing this kind of devastation to the country. So this regime really has a fundamental decision to make. The succession process could play a role here, but let me just also say this, and maybe I'll stop. But, it could well be the case that the succession process really at this point is irrelevant. The Revolutionary Guard has been running Iran in actual fact for some time. They could come out and basically say conditions do not allow us for us to have another supreme leader if they don't agree on one. They could have a symbolic figure who sits there, and most likely that's what's going to happen. I mean, for someone as a supreme leader to enter the stage and overnight shape the trajectory of the country, that's very unlikely to do. Even Ali Khamenei couldn't do that. Ali Khamenei took about 3-4 years before he found his way. So right now, I think it's a mistake to think the silver bullet here is a new supreme leader who comes in and magically changes everything. It's not going to happen. That person can be holding the hand of the rest of the regime and go in a certain direction. As I said, it depends which way they want to go. But the character of that person is not going to overnight change much. It's the consensus of what's left of the regime. And I think in that consensus, the future of the Revolutionary Guards and their calculations is probably the most important for us to factor in.
Thanks, Alex. Kadir Hocam, let's move on to you. I want to talk more about the regional implications of the conflict. This is arguably one of the more destabilizing developments in the region in for so long. So I want to particularly ask for the Turkish perspective here. We have seen in the press as well as in the officials' remarks that a missile going in the direction of Turkey was intercepted by NATO forces positioned in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there are also rumors with varying degrees that US and Israel are scheming to arm some of the groups in the Iranian Kurdistan to maybe part of some ground forces against the regime. Do you think this missile incident, as well as the arming of the PKK's Iran branch, Pejak, would that trigger Turkey's security concerns? And can you also add more about other actors in the region, maybe Gulf? How are others looking at this issue?
Of course, so Turkey sees this in a regional context. Of course, Turkey has been involved in ensuring that there's more stability, more sort of predictability, especially its investment and in Syria, trying to get Gulf countries, Arab countries have a stake in the future of Syria and stuff like that. Of course, this war, in my opinion, is just the latest sort of more upgraded stage in the regional kind of competition between Iran and Israel. But Israel has been able to do something that it has wanted for a long time, but it couldn't until Trump administration. So. But Turkey, of course, has some immediate security concerns, including the missile you mentioned. Turkey is under the NATO umbrella, of course. It has sought to have, air defense systems in acquire S-400s in the past, and that became a problem with the United States. You know that history. And then there's, of course, a concern for potential refugee inflows, and of course, PKK being armed, whether it be in Iraq or Iran and or Syria. It's always been a major concern, and Turkey has worked to thwart such activities, and it's caused problems with the Americans as well. But so those immediate security concerns are obviously on top of the Turkish minds. But when we look at the regional dimension, it's important to I think understand that Israel has has given the message to the region that things are not going to be the same since after October the 7th. They wanted to make that a whole new beginning, beginning of a regional confrontation with Iran, but also message to the rest of the region that we can hit anybody anywhere as we like, right? And they were very quick to take the fight to other countries after Gaza started, right? After October 7th. They hit, Lebanon, they hit Syria, they hit Tehran, they, accomplished quote unquote assassinations, made, Hamas leaders in Tehran were killed. They've taken it to other areas like Yemen, and they targeted 7 countries. When they targeted Qatar, of course, it was a turning point, and Trump had to intervene and sort of hold back the Israeli ambitions a little bit, for a little bit, we should say. But like Trita said, it looked very serious that Trump could take, he wouldn't really hold back from going into a hot conflict. That was shown in last June. He didn't prefer it. He wanted to declare some sort of political victory, but Iran was not willing to give it to him. Of course, that's a failure on their part, but there's an argument there that basically what Trump demanded in this latest episode really went against the basic logic of the regime. It would mean regime denying itself, but at the same time, they could have found a way to draw a wedge between America and Israel, especially Trump. If you give him some sort of political victory, you could have maybe you could have gotten him to hold Israel back a little bit, maybe for a while at least. So anyway, but those are hypotheticals. Those are counterfactuals. What we have since October 7, especially, Israel wanted to turn this into a big opportunity to basically take down what it sees as its biggest competitor in this region. And this has all sorts of implications for the region. Syria cannot pose any kind of serious threat to Israel. Lebanon cannot. Iraq cannot. And only country that can do it is Iran. Now, that's the scenario we are seeing playing itself out. This is deeply concerning for Turkey, Turkish security, Turkish view on the region. Turkey, wants to focus on rebuilding the region, wants to focus on rebuilding Syria. Further war sets back the region by, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever. So this is going to, and it doesn't look like Israel is willing to stop this. They feel like they have 3 years. Even if even if Trump lost the midterm elections, probably House of Representatives, he could be a bit restrained, but even then, he doesn't have to worry about re-election. And Congress, just yesterday's vote, showed that they will line up with Trump, they will line up with Israel. So this people who calculate that this will all be over before the midterms, I don't think that's true. Past couple of years showed us that Israel is not willing to stop until it establishes some sort of dominance in this region, and Iran is a major obstacle for that. So this is deeply concerning, like I said, in terms of both regional stability, regional balance, and what Arab countries do, what Gulf countries do. They're going to, they're needing American help to defend themselves, etc., and they are participating now, directly or indirectly, in this war. Further war in this region doesn't benefit Turkish national interests.
All right. Thank you. Trita, moving back to you, I want to ask the transition question to you as well, but I want to first ask, where is the public debate in Iran right now? Like, what are they debating regarding the regime, regarding the transition? And what I want to ask particularly is, like, does the U.S. have any levers regarding influencing this debate or influencing the transition, or who going to succeed Khamenei, as Trump insinuated a couple of times, as to like he would be involved in choosing who's next, maybe directly or indirectly. What would you say to that? Does the US have any tools regarding that?
Thank you. I think Alex gave a very good and comprehensive response, and I think he pointed to some very important things. Let me just put one of them a bit under question. And I know Alex said that this is one scenario essentially, and I agree with him. It is a scenario, but here's why I think it's an unlikely scenario. Because essentially the argument is Khamenei is definitely hardline, Mujtaba, and probably worse than his father, unacceptable to the US. Someone else would be preferable, someone that Trump could work with, etc. And that may be true, that Trump's position is that. But Trump has constantly been putting forward another example of what his preference is. And that example is Venezuela. And when you look at what happened in Venezuela, you don't have just a capitulation of the government, you have a capitulation of all of their top policies. Trump not only is going out there and saying that he has essentially turned Venezuela into a colony, that he tweeted that picture where he was like the king or the president of Venezuela, but also look at one of the first decisions they made. The decision was to stop selling oil to Cuba and start selling oil to Venezuela. I have a very hard time seeing that there is anyone that will come out of this system that is willing to go along with that type of a model in which they completely reverse decades old policies that I think they have very strong ideological commitments to. And that is actually what Trump is looking for. And as a result, yes, Moshtaba may be the worst, but there's no one else that is willing to come out that actually has credibility and could survive giving that type of surrender to Trump and turn Iran's policies around in that way. So I think absolutely Trump is hoping to find that type of a person, but just as much as he was hoping for the type of surrender in the talks, that he was hoping for that type of a surrender in the early stages of the war, I think he's going to be disappointed again because I just don't see the system being able to survive that type of a surrender. This is a system they came, at least their own narrative is that they were restoring Iranian independence, that they did this because they didn't want to be subject to, which I personally think is a false view, that they think that the Shah was just doing America's bidding. I think the Shah actually was a very independent actor and annoyed the American decision makers quite extensively. But that is the narrative. And to just go from there to becoming a colony of the United States in the manner that Trump is talking about Venezuela, I think is not likely. Now, Trump, again, may actually not have that in mind, but that is the example he's putting forward. And that's the most effective argument I think he could put forward to make sure that he never gets that type of a person stepping forward.
All right. Like regarding the ground forces thing. So the boots on the ground is a big red line in the US. But interestingly, the Trump, Hegseth, Rubio, nobody is ruling out that option. It wasn't in the cards like a couple of months ago, but now we're discussing it seriously. But we see some Congress people saying, like, this is a no-go, this is a hard sell in the US Congress, among the American people, particularly the MAGA crowd, MAGA base of Trump. So we see that they're trying to be creative to work with somebody else's boots on the ground, and that, as we discussed with Kadroja as well, would be some ethnic elements in Iran. What I want to ask you, Trita, again, is like, would that trigger a nationalistic reaction in Iran? Like, would that be counterproductive to what the US and Israel are thinking?
I think the likelihood of it being counterproductive is far greater than it actually being something that would get more defections or the level of defections that they're hoping for. Similarly to the fact that an air campaign that increasingly is starting to look very, very indiscriminatory. We have plenty of examples of how in history, all the way going back to the Second World War, how it tended to create a rally around the flag phenomenon. I think the starting point is a very, very negative one for the Iranian government, mindful of how profoundly unpopular it is, particularly after the massacres back in January. But nevertheless, I do think that many of these things that are being done is counterproductive to the stated goal that they want to see either enough defections coming out, an implosion of the regime, or a unification of the people against the government, because the issue of the Kurdish insurgents is extremely sensitive. And there is already a very strong narrative in Iran that both US and that some regional powers have for long had the design of partitioning Iran into smaller countries. In fact, Tariq Aziz, the foreign minister of Saddam Hussein, said this in an interview, I believe it was 1981, that it would be much preferable to Iraq to live to 6 small Irans than one big one. So this is not just taking out of thin air. These are statements from senior officials. You, of course, have a pretty rich literature in the United States, starting with Bernard Lewis, talking about these things, etc. So that narrative does exist, and these type of actions is exactly what would feed into that narrative. Does it balance out against the tremendous anger against the regime? It's difficult to tell, obviously, but I personally think that it most likely will.
Thank you. Alex, I want to ask you about Iran's response to the attack. We see Iran being more effective this time. At least the response time to the attacks has been decreased considerably, probably related to like decisions made earlier on regarding having the troops more decentralized, or having commanders succeeding one another decided beforehand. Do you consider Iranian response to be capable enough? In other words, is Iran hitting back hard enough? And also, is Iran choosing its targets wisely? The reason why I'm asking this is like Iran is trying to impose costs in what it considers US allies in the Gulf and in the region. Do you think this is a good strategy to like have them indirectly influence the US and maybe weaken US resolve?
Let me separate that into two. One about
Okay.
capacity to hit back, and then what about motivations? Look, the capacity part, it's to be tested. I mean, Iran's armed forces, particularly the Revolutionary Guards, are being tested unlike any time before. They've had decades to plan for something in terms of a large war. How much planning did they do? It's a question mark. To be honest, obviously, I do not believe what officials in Tehran promise in terms of revenge and retribution, because we know the Islamic Republic is famous for slogans that oftentimes fall way short of what actually in a position to do. And I would also add the slogans, 47 years of sloganeering is one of the reasons why they are in the situation they're in. A lot of slogans that really wouldn't be backed up. So in terms of missiles, I mean, depending on who you ask, I don't think anybody knows. I don't even know if the Iranians at this point inside Iran have a good, clear idea of how many, for example, ballistic missiles and so forth they have. They have, in the thousands of ballistic missiles, probably far more medium and short range missiles, which, by the way, trying to link this to the issue of the Gulf, it's Israel that will first experience a decline or no more Iranian missiles coming their way. And the Gulf states and others closer to Iran are more likely to see more of it because Iran would have a longer capacity in terms of time and what he has in terms of more short and medium range missiles to hit places that are closer to it on the other side of the Persian Gulf than, say, reach Israel. So it's a big test for them. The drones, we're talking tens of thousands of drones. We've seen what they can do, even if they are not lethal in terms of devastation, just a psychological role they can play, certainly in a place like the Gulf region, the Strait of Hormuz, the commercial hubs that we find in Iran south, it could be a formidable psychological fear factor, even if those ballistic missiles and the other Iranian missile arsenal are exhausted. So I would say big test. Let's see. Obviously, we have for years now talked about Iran's key kind of strengths as it prepared itself for asymmetric warfare, as they call it. It's the missiles, it's the drones, it's cyber, which I haven't so far seen anything being deployed. Not that has been, I'm sure they're operating in that realm too, but nothing sort of has been done that has made it out to the media. The last one is obviously the use of proxies / terrorism. That one also remains to be seen because you could make the argument that what they're engaging in sequential escalation. Just because the Houthis aren't attacking today doesn't mean the Houthis are not going to attack at all. That's a, again, separate issue. So that's that in terms of capabilities. But look, the intentions are very clear, and they telegraphed this for weeks, for months. They said next war, after the 12-day war, will be something that will be more likely aimed at the toppling of the regime. Therefore, we have everything to fight for. And if we are going to, again, we've all heard this over the course of the last week, if we're going to go down, we're going to try and hurt as many for as long as we can as we're going down. And that's exactly what they're doing. So all the sort of niceties and diplomatic, agreements like the Iranian-Saudi deal that the Chinese brokers, none of that really at this point seems to matter. None of it shaping their calculations. They are fighting for their survival. They are bleeding. They know what's going to happen to them if the American and Israeli bombs don't get them, their own people might get them. So the intentions, and if they can continue to expand this conflict with reports of Azerbaijan not being hit, you were talking about Turkey before, Cyprus has been mentioned, unusual target. So if they can do that, again, the whole aim is to get maximum amount of pressure you can to get to Donald Trump or Bibi Netanyahu to get them to back off. And that's a hope they have. I'm not necessarily sure they're going to be able to successfully get Trump and Netanyahu to back off. Certainly not Netanyahu. They might get Trump to back off because he also has to worry about domestic political realities inside the United States.
All right, thank you, Alex. Kadir Hocam, I want to take this and turn to the US calculations regarding this. We talked about how Trump got here, about the diplomacy. I want to ask you about what would cause Trump to change course. I'm not asking in terms of operational tempo or operational developments, but like more in terms of what kind of a win Trump needs at this moment, or what kind of a development would discourage Trump to continue on this path in your reading.
Look, President Trump has the ability to just say tomorrow that he won. Like Alex said, Khamenei is dead and we're done. That's his political, style. And then 2 weeks from then, he can just come back to say something else, do something else. But then we have to understand, I think, the deeper, broader structural reasons why America is involved in this and is willing, from Congress's, attitude, you can see, it's willing to go toy with the idea of even using boots on the ground. I don't know if, a month from now, if Trump administration says we do need 10, 20,000 troops in Hormuz, and we need to, make sure the ships are passing through safely, etc. I'm not sure if Congress is going to resist that, even though, like you said, it's often said to be a red line. So it's hard to, judge Trump what he might do. He prefers to be unpredictable as a leader, but at the same time, it's like this big thing is coming and you can see it. It's been months, right? The threats, the accumulation of all these US assets around the region, around Iran. Um, Iran, I think, let me just slip this in, may have miscalculated by refusing to hold these talks in Turkey as well. That could have helped perhaps having Trump's ear a bit more, like Trita was saying. I'm not arguing this would have prevented it. I'm just saying, uh, like Alex described the regime's perspective on this, like we are going down, so we are gonna hit everybody. That logic, like diplomatic talks failing, and then okay, they're gonna come after the regime and we just have to just hit everybody and everything all at the same time. I think there's a big, space in there. They could have exploited, I think they could have been a bit more skillful in terms of their diplomatic capabilities and political approach to this. But uh, and the operational decision to decentralize like this and hitting so many countries, it's pushing them further into, loneliness. Like they're going isolation. Um, it, let's say, again, counterfactual. If they focused solely on Israel, for instance, hitting Israel, or just very selective American, like their initial response could have been a bit more, narrowly defined, I guess. So we are where we are, and Trump always needs some sort of big win, but he defines the terms of that, right? He we don't know where he might stop, etc. But now we are in a situation, it may not be really up to him because there's so much on the ground. You initiated this war, and there's all these thousands of sorties being done, and if you declare victory and pull back, and then there are still missiles coming into Israel, it's going to look bad on him. So I think he's going to try to eliminate missile capacity. Not that he can find all the missiles and destroy them all, but if he can establish a new reality where Iranians cannot fire missiles, because firing missiles, having the missiles is something, but being able to firing them, it requires coordination, um, and some sort of central command structure, so that I'll leave that to the military analysts, but it's not easy when you're being bombarded in the air all day long. So those capabilities may remain as capabilities, not fully realized. They may be sitting in storage that you can't really use. So I'm not sure about, like I said, military analysts will have to talk about those. But Trump needs some sort of political win. But when you're in a war, you unleash a lot of unknowns, and then, you may not be able to easily pull back.
Okay, thank you. Now we have some questions from the audience. I have questions as well, but let's make sure we hit them and we don't run out of time. So, Trita, this first question is to you. Laura Rosen is asking, if Trump can't find that person, does the scenario of Israel pushing for civil war become more likely? What do you say?
I think it all depends on the time frame. I think I think I mentioned it earlier on that, there's a belief that the Iranians could give something else and then Trump would declare victory. I think Trump can declare victory at any moment that he wants. I think Alex And Kadir also mentioned the same thing. He has killed his supreme leader. He probably has destroyed a significant number of missiles, or at least missile launchers. He can at least say that he's degraded it. He can say that I showed them that I wasn't afraid of starting the war. They thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. And he can also, and on top of that, make up a bunch of things. It's not about him finding an exit. It's about him understanding that the cost of not taking the exit has become too high. At this point, I don't think he's feeling it. I think there's a scramble and they're trying to dramatically turn the tables on the Iranians by, suddenly doing a land invasion, all of these things that I don't think they had planned for at all. These are steps that reflect the failure of their previous plans. And also, we're not seeing yet that the very, very low support level and the very high opposition level in the American public has translated into grassroots pressure on the White House. And at the end of the day, that means that the American people are not angry enough about it, because it only matters when they're so angry that they actually call the White House, or they're turning that into some sort of a political pressure. Public opinion in of itself is meaningless. It's the public opinion that is organized, that is actually activated, that matters. We haven't seen that, and perhaps it's too soon to see that. But I think that's where the real effect is, that he feels that the pain of this is too hard. He's not getting anywhere in the war. And that's when he will change his mind, declare victory based on whatever he can come up with. And he does have valid things that he can point to, of course. And that's when he will take it.
Thank you. Another question, Alex, would you be kind enough to respond to this, please? After these attacks, could Iran become more determined to pursue nuclear weapons instead of leading to de-escalation? Might this intervention actually escalate the existing tensions in the region?
Thank you for that. Look, I mean, this takes us to the heart of the matter where we are today, less than a week into this conflict. We can sit here and this sort of debate why the United States and Israel attacked Iran. The timing, the motivation, the necessity, all of those things are very fair to be debated. And as we know, to Trita's point, in the United States, clearly, vast majority of Americans are not convinced. So this is to you go with the headline of the week, Trump's war of choice. I think it's hard to disagree with that. But that's been done now. Here we are. And to the point about what comes next. So you have now done this regime real serious harm. The Supreme Leader is gone. And I wouldn't underestimate the emotional component of some of the people inside the Iranian regime in terms of what happened. I mean, it wasn't just Khamenei before his death who was talking about Imam Hussein and martyrdom, and in sort of casting this conflict in theological terms. There are many others who are still alive who might look at this issue that way. So you've now really upset this regime. If it survives, presumably will have all sorts, if the hardliners double down, as I was saying earlier, not change course, the likelihood that they're going to look for ways to get back at Trump, whatever tools they might come up with, is real. So that means, so what do we do now? And this is where Donald Trump's zigzagging in terms of what the end goal is not helping anyone. So again, I hate to sit here and advocate for this war to continue when it's just basically what's certain is bombs are dropping, but there's no real political game. But if you could come up with that political game, because the realities are Iranian people want to get rid of this regime. But so far, we've engaged essentially in wishful thinking. Some opposition from outside is going to miraculously take over. It's not going to happen. You need to have a game plan. You need to, above all, look for ways to bring people inside of the regime, the rank and file, without blood on their hands. You got to get them on board to accept that the country's future, as Iran, as we've known it for the last 5,000 years, is at risk here. Maybe you can appeal to that Iranian nationalism, get people to get off, and then you can obviously bring the opposition from outside. But all of that, what I'm saying, requires a political game plan. I'm just not seeing any signs that that's what we have here. And the introduction of ethnic Kurds from northern Iraq into Iran, yeah, you're going to bleed the regime. You're going to frail Iran even more. But that's not a serious proposition when you're looking at regime change. The most ethnic Kurds can do is take over, charge a few provinces in the west of Iran, kind of like KRG in northern Iraq. that's not going to solve your problem. That would be a strategic defeat for the United States to hurt Iran, to weaken Iran, and to walk away. Now, I know I think Trita mentioned this. There are a lot of people in the region who think Israel basically would be happy with that. And that's probably true. The Israelis would probably, I assume, wouldn't mind a republic, secular republic in Iran that was not a threat to Israel. That's their bottom line, threat perception. They would take that. But if they don't get that, and what they can get is in Iran in civil war, I'm sure they'll be happy to live with that as well. So it goes back to the point of what's the political end game here. I haven't seen any signs of people spending many nights over small details of how we do it, which is a tragedy because this is a war that's now costing thousands of lives and just $1 billion a day bill to pay for it, and we don't have an end game. So it's a tragedy not just for the American taxpayer, if you will, but all those people who are dying, and also a tragedy when I think about this war ending, Khamenei gone, but this Islamic Republic still being in play. And as we just read last few hours, Donald Trump wants to select the next supreme leader. I don't know what to say to that. Next supreme leader basically means the Islamic Republic stays. And to Trita's point, those people don't want to do what Venezuela did. They're not going to sit there and just take orders from Donald Trump. So the sense of unrealistic expectations here is what really takes me back more than anything else.
Trita, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could add something. Alex makes some excellent points there. I do differ a little bit, though. I do think that the Israelis' preference actually is more for chaos and civil war than a secular government. And let me see if I can back that up a little bit. I do remember an Israeli general told me in Israel when I was writing my book on Iran and Israel. He said very bluntly, he said, look, Iran was once a friend of Israel, and then it turned into an enemy. It could once again turn into a friend, but it could also after that once again turn into an enemy. And we cannot afford to have that threat. So our focus is not on the regime, our focus is on the capability. And any secular government that would come in place, particularly one that would be oriented towards Israel, particularly if it would be, some variation of the son of the Shah, etc. I personally don't think that would last very long. And also the literature, and this is very clear. Lindsay O'Rourke, one of our non-resident fellows, has written extensively on how oftentimes even successful regime change operations done by the United States within a couple of years lead to those states once again pursuing the policies that the US opposed in the first place because geopolitical forces are stronger than just mere political forces. So I do think that they're more focused on really degrading the capacity. Look at what they did in Syria. As soon as Assad fell, even on Israeli TV, they said it. Within 20 minutes, they said, we turn Syria into all of Syria into a shooting range, making sure that whatever government comes afterward is irrelevant because none of them will have the capability of challenging Israel's domination. And I think it's far more important for the Israelis, but more difficult, obviously, to do that in Iran than it is to do it in Syria. Then also take another thing. The Israelis are very, very open right now in their language about Turkey. We saw that Naftali Bennett gave a speech about 2-3 weeks ago. He said, Erdogan is the most dangerous person in the Middle East. Turkey is the next threat. Turkey is going to try to encircle us. All of these things. This to me sounded exactly to what happened in 1991. Throughout the 70s and even the 80s, the Iranians and the Israelis were actually close. The Israelis were the ones lobbying for Iran in the 1980s in the Iraq-Iran war because it was more important for the Israelis to make sure that Iraq was defeated than that the Islamic Republic, despite its very, very venomous anti-Israeli rhetoric, went away. So paradoxically, they were pushing for the Iranian side at that time. As soon as the war ended, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, Iraq was defeated, and the common threats between Iran and Israel evaporated, it was on the Israeli side that you first started to hear Iran is the next threat. And now, when Iran has been weakened, immediately you're starting to hear on the Israeli side, Turkey is the next threat. But Turkey has not called for Israel's destruction. Turkey had normalized relations with Israel. Erdogan is not using the rhetoric of the Iranians. All of these explanations that this is all happening because the slogans of the Iranians, etc., which I agree are highly problematic, but to be some sort of explanatory factor as to why this geopolitical rivalry is taking place, well, then you have to apply that to Turkey as well. Yes, Turkey is pro-Palestinian in many different ways. But Turkey has gone to none of the excesses that the Iranians have, including having normalized relations a long time ago. So why is that then happening? So I think we have to actually get to the core of this issue, which is that from the Israeli side, security is not achieved through balancing, through management. Security is achieved through complete domination. For Israel to feel safe, everyone else have to have zero security or at least zero capability of challenging Israel's domination. I don't think that is a successful approach to security for any state, but particularly not for a state that actually can't do it on its own, but constantly needs to have the United States to support it. So I think this is actually a suicidal approach for the Israelis, but it is one that is continuing to be endorsed and funded by the US as well as politically supported by most European states.
Thanks, Trisa. Kadir, would you like to react to that? And plus, there's a question about Turkey from Roy Gutman. How will Turkey react if the US starts supporting PJAK?
Well,
So, please.
I think, the United States supported PKK in northern Syria for a long time, and Turkey managed that, and now it's at a much better place. When you look at that history, I think PJAK is a much smaller quote unquote problem, but doesn't mean, Turkish state has really deep expertise in this. 50 years of expertise about the different factions within the Kurdish population. Turkey has the largest Kurdish population in the Middle East, but PKK, PJAK, and terror groups like that, Turkey has been dealing with them for a long time. But what Trita said is important. I think we have to recognize that Israel is doing this, is pulling the United States into this war. Yes, Trump is choosing to participate in this war, but if he got that big win, he could have shied away from it. How is Israel able to bring America into the picture in the way that it has done? It's of course, DC politics in many ways has a big role in that. Congressional support, Israel's, influence in the United States for a very long time. But like Trita was saying, how, Turkey is being threatened by some Israeli leaders. It's true. But the challenge there would be for Israel to bring America on board to take drastic action against Turkey. And Turkey actually has been experiencing this in northern Syria for a long time. Israel has actually reached out to PKK's northern Syria branch. They've promised them support, etc. And today, when they're talking about, it looks like disinformation that PJAK already started taking up arms. We don't know what's happening on the ground. But let's say it looks like an Israeli kind of disinformation campaign. But even if that were to be realized, I think you will see Turkey following those developments very closely, and they will, take action. And recently, when PKK was pushed out of Syria, northern Syria, Foreign Minister Fidan said on Turkish TV, well, they're not gone. They're now in Iraq. We have to deal with them in Iraq. That story for Turkey is nothing new or surprising. And if PJAK is activated, supported by Israel and even America, that will be a challenge to deal with, just like Turkey has been dealing with that challenge for a long time. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It has a negative impact on Turkish-American relationship, but nevertheless, Turkey will deal with it. So in terms of regional, this was not purely about nuclear file. America chose to perhaps treat it that way. Obama perhaps found it useful to make it about the nuclear capability, but the regional competition, we could manage that separately. But Israel has now turned this into basically, convinced the Trump administration, convinced Congress that the regional competition with Iran is existential. It's not just nuclear that is existential for them. It is that regional confrontation with them. So can they do that with Turkey? I mean, Turkey has, I don't want to like try to compare, but you just have to look at Turkey's challenges in the past with Greece, in the past with Armenia to some extent, in northern Syria with PKK. These either smaller states, strong or not, I mean, Greece is part of NATO, or sub-state actors. Turkey is not immune to regional threats and challenges, but it has been able to manage it both by building national capacity, defense, capacities, being part of NATO, and perhaps doing the diplomacy more or less correctly and right. It doesn't make sure that, it doesn't make sure that Israel will never consider Turkey a threat. But let me just end on a little bit of a funny note that on social media after all these Naftali Bennett statements, Trita, Turks were posting these videos where you could how to use an F-16 and how to use a tank for the Turkish, but it just tells you that they're highly sensitive to regional developments and they don't see themselves, even at the public level, outside this picture, which means that, Turkey is part of this regional confrontation, like you described, and Israel would like to see it that way. But I think without the United States capability, United States willingness to target those countries, I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Okay, Trita, you want to?
I just wanted to, I don't want to
Yeah.
beat a dead horse here, but there is a
Yeah,
Wall
we
Street
got a
Journal.
couple of more questions, so
Yeah, just very quickly. There's the Wall Street Journal op-ed today exactly saying this. After the Iraq
Yeah.
war, Iran exploited the power vacuum left by Saddam Hussein. While neutralizing the regional threat posed by Iran, the US and Israel must ensure that Turkey doesn't take its place.
Correct.
okay.
But Turkey took, like, remember the Davos, Erdogan walked out of Davos summit, what, in 2008? It's been 18 years. So, and CHP leadership in 1990s, Bülent Ecevit called Israeli actions a genocide in the 90s. So when you see this pro-Palestinian policy of Turkey, it's actually non-partisan. It's overwhelming, to be honest, in Turkey. Doesn't mean Turkey is going to go after Israel or wage war or get into a fight. It's just that those kind of statements remain kind of up in the air, to be honest. Just like some Greek statesman saying things. I don't want to like diminish the weight of this because it shows you how paranoid some of these leaders could be and how they're committed to instability, to be honest, in this region. But I don't think they will amount to a much.
Okay. Let's put
So
this issue at rest for the moment. We might
Okay.
discuss this maybe in another event, in the future. Alex, another question for you. Hexet said this war is not Iraq or Afghanistan because they're not doing nation building or promoting democracy. What are the chances this war actually ends up being like them?
Look, they
Very
could.
briefly, please.
Yeah, very briefly, it could
Yeah.
be that it becomes nation building, but doesn't have to look like the Iraq style nation building. But at the very least, the United States could start looking for some of the intelligence assets, for example, that US and Israel have inside of Iran, use them to essentially create the kind of conditions when you hollow out the regime. You cannot deal with the hardliners today because they just want revenge, they want to fight. But I'm sure there are plenty others who really do want to save the rest of the country and might be open for compromise of sorts. So I think that one quick thing about boots on the ground, though, look, if there are still 400 kilograms of enriched uranium somewhere in Iran, so at some point, at least the use of special forces for very special operations whether it's taking out missile launchers, strategic assets, or like I said, they enrich uranium. Those types of things are very likely to happen because you're not going to be sure that you've achieved success from air alone. And I just saw Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, saying to US media, they're expecting some American boots on the ground. And as he put it, they're waiting for him. Obviously, for a lot of Iranian hardliners, this is the sort of match that they've been waiting for because they have a higher chance of actually being able to kill Americans, if you will, on the ground, as opposed to waiting for American missiles and bombs to be dropped on them, where they're essentially helpless, as we can see right now. So, yeah, I don't want to put a very negative turn at the very end of this panel discussion, but that's certainly a realistic scenario for us to think about.
Indeed, Alex. Thank you very much. So, unfortunately, we ran out of time at this event. Thank you all to the panel for touching upon so many issues from the situation in Iran to US domestic politics and reverberations in the region. Unfortunately, we had to skip some of the question. We ran out of time, but many other issues remains to be discussed in hopefully future events with you. Thank you again for contributing, and I would like to thank to the participants for listening to this. Have a great rest of the day, and see you soon again.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
very
much. Thank you.